FM WOCT and streamed on the World Wide Web at OshkoshCommunityMedia.org.
The regular council meeting, but we're doing it in a format of a workshop, because we're basically talking about the budget. And tonight, in talking about the budget, we've got some new information, which will be updated information from our previous 6 workshops, workshop number 7. So he'll bring us up to date. He's also done some what-ifs for us, and those kind of should be going across the page, just not up and down on the page. And so then council members have a chance to ask any questions they want. We have a number of department heads here. We might want to ask department heads questions, ask Mark questions, ask Trina questions, and then we hope at the end we might throw out some ideas about what's on people's minds as we go into the budget meeting, with the idea that between now and the final decision on the 25th, people can still be contacting Mark with ideas that they may want to add. If you have ideas about cuts you want to make or things that you want to add to it, it would be helpful to get those ideas to Mark so that he can prepare, he and Trina, probably Trina, should do the bulk of the work, preparing what the impact would be, so that night we can get all the figuring done and actually come up with a budget and also come up with the tax levy and come up with the tax rate. Is that a fair synopsis of what we're trying to do and where we're going to go?
Very good.
It also doesn't preclude from any amendments being made that night. But if we can do some pre-work and they can do some figuring ahead of time, it should make that meeting a little bit easier. It'll still be tough.
Yeah, I think our hope is that we'll be able to give you a series of decision packages that you can work from, and you can go through them methodically and have in mind. If you have in mind by that point, then you can make some suggestions. Mr. Mayor, if you could indulge me, I would just want to walk you through a few of the handouts that we gave council. Just see if there's any general questions. We're really just trying to help set you up to help the decision-making process. We had talked about a series of changes that really didn't have any budgetary impact, no service impact, and happy to report that we found net savings of $46,000 for a variety of items that we had talked about over the course of the work sessions. When you'd ask questions during the budget workshop, we said we would check those out. There were a variety of things. One was some police salaries were a little over. We made some adjustments there. There was one we pointed out with IT where we made a cut twice to a budget. And there was also the infamous payment for municipal services that we lost $80,000 on that. All of those things netting out, we ended up with a positive $46,000. So that means that
one quick question here. Are you making the assumption that basically assessed value is basically the same, so that whatever the change in the levy is, that'll also equate to pretty much the change in the tax rate itself? Is that the fundamental assumption?
Yes, we have our number for our assessed value that we're working off of, and every penny on the tax rate equates to $35,093.75. So we've got it down to that amount. So with that, our calculation is that as adjusted with those $46,000, we're right now at a 4.4% increase, and that's basically what you saw in the budget. We just tweaked it, and that's where it is, and that's with no policy decisions or changes by council.
Okay. I just want to clarify. Sometimes you'll see that the levy increases by 1% and the tax rate at a lower percentage or a higher percentage, and the difference between those two is the assessed value, pretty much. So when you say the levy at 4.4%, you're assuming that's going to be pretty much what the tax rate increase.
Roughly, because we're really close to being at 100% value.
That was what.
And that's the reason why.
That was my question, but.
we'll have a rate for you as we get closer to the targets there. What we did was we took, we went from 0.5% to 4.5%. You can see that to get to any of those thresholds, what you would have to do. 1% increase in the levy equates to $320,310. So what we've done is, based on the existing budget, depending on where you want to land or where you'd like to try to land with the levy, we've got, for example, 4%, because actually we're under 4.5% now. But to get to 4%, we would need to get savings of $129,560. And then on down to get 3.5, $289,000. To get down to a 3% increase, $449,000. And you can see as it goes on. It just gives you, it's a worksheet, just so you can keep this until the 25th, because this is, as you're working towards it, depending on what your inclination is, this gives you an idea of how much work you need to do to get to your target landing spot. Are there any questions with the worksheet as I've presented it to you? Okay, the other things we've added are just things that are already in your budget. For example, we have a copy of Roman numeral page 10X. Those are the ones that we identified potential savings if you wanted to make any changes. These are not in the budget right now. So to get to one of these landing spots on the first page, these are your options that staff presented, and council may have other ideas, but this gives you what to work from. This is essentially the worksheet that we're going to have ready for you on the 25th. As you hone in on those things, which ones seem to be a little more likely or to add to the list. If you come up with anything either tonight or in the interim time or even on the 25th, Ms. Larson will be at the ready at the laptop. You give us the ideas that you want to throw in, and we'll give you the impact, both on a levy standpoint as well as what it would do with the tax rate.
Just a question. I'm just going to throw this example, so don't anybody take this to heart, okay? Let's just go to the police department. You got a 2% salary savings, but you list three different things: attrition, hiring freeze, and layoff. If you separated them out, or let's just say you did a 6-month hiring freeze for, say, the police department and the fire department. If you had some retirees and you waited for 6 months to hire, how would that affect the budget?
That's a very specific question that I would ask the police and fire chiefs to come up and try to give you the best answer they could. And over time, between now and the 25th, we would get you more specific information.
Because like I say, attrition could be, that means through somebody retires, you don't fill the position. Well, that's basically is that like a layoff? Equivalent to a layoff?
It's equivalent
or
to...
Or you fill the position, you lay the last one hired, last one gone, first one gone.
No, attrition means as somebody were to leave service.
Right.
It's essentially a hiring freeze for the time being.
Okay. But let's just say we wanted to do a 6-month. Is there any savings? I mean, I think the police chief said it takes 6 months to 9 months to even get an officer up to speed to be on his own, just to go on probation. So now you take 6 months off of that. Now you're really saying he's not going to have an officer for a year and a half.
I would ask each of the chiefs individually to come up and tell us how they would do that, because there are some things where they might exercise some discretion, and it really comes down to how they're going to exercise discretion. Salary savings is something that I've seen done over the years, where you take, especially a larger department, you just factor in that there's going to be turnover. Now, in some cases, the turnover isn't going to be significant in police as it is fire, after having discussion. But if those were to occur, what accommodations would the department make to account for not filling a position for so many months, whether it was a temporary hiring freeze, a permanent hiring freeze, or just naturally, we know it takes so many months to fill a new position, but what would they do in the interim? Would they fill it with more overtime, or would they just simply do without the position? And I think those are detailed questions that I would defer completely to the chiefs. I think they know their departments, and they would have to answer those questions a little more detailed. But I think any of these, when ever you're talking about positions, I would want the department head up here giving you specific details on that.
Then just one other question, under the transportation budget, street lighting, obviously, there's always a concern about proper lighting of streets. Would we do an analysis of streets, or it just says reduce mid-block? I mean, is that citywide, certain parts of the city? How would we come to determine what lights stay on and what lights go off for $35,000 savings?
We currently have a distance that we have set that Mr. Collins can tell you about, and we have them on corners and in cul-de-sacs. So if you have an extra long block that doesn't have a lot of those, either a cul-de-sac or an intersection, you could be taking out, instead of every 200 feet, it would be every 400 feet. I think it's about 350 feet, Jim? Yeah, so it's 350 feet right now. So you could find yourself, if you take out one every 350 feet, you could see a 700-foot distance, depending on if there's a cross street or something like that.
Yeah, basically we'd have to revisit our practice, and we haven't defined exactly what that would be, but the distance now is from a light, so generally we try to light the corners, and then the distance from a light is about 350, 370 feet. We would have to change that practice, and we would have to come up with some parameters for how we would do that.
Okay, just curiosity questions at this point. I'm not making any recommendations or suggestions at this point, just find some questions answered. Thank you.
I have one question under the community development planning, the elimination of an assistant planner. As I recall, in one of our sessions, Mr. Davis said that position is partially funded by community block grant dollars, and it also does a lot of grant writing, so does the position somewhat pay for itself?
I can certainly ask Mr. Davis to
Back there.
Give some input onto that. But the idea behind these is each of these, if you want to go through them individually or whatever, we can do that. I just wanted to give you an idea that for the next meeting, we would have a worksheet very similar to this, and we would start from this and add to this or take away depending on sort of the leanings of council based on this workshop.
And the quick answer is yes. The way we've programmed our staff for this position, I believe 50 or 60% of that is going to be funded by community development block grant funds. So we could cut the position. So I'm not certain how that would actually affect the tax rate impact. So I guess I'd have to defer to finance department and figure out exactly how that would work its way through with the tax levy. But yes, that position is more than half funded with block grant funds.
Mr. Davis, as long as we've got you up here, and I'm changing gears a little bit, but there was I recall there was a $30,000 line item in economic development for the contracted administrator position that is currently being contracted out to Brenda Hicks Sorensen. I had a conversation with her last week. As citizens know, I'm on the marketing committee, and she had informed us that her contract had been cut for next year and that she wasn't going to be around after January 1st. I had informed her that, at least as far as I knew, it was in the budget to keep her through that. I think you had said the first couple months of the year, 3-4 months, and she had said she didn't know that was news to her. Has there been a change in the status of that?
I think there is, since we prepared the budget, based on what we're expecting for the pass-through of the county funds. 50 cents per capita would be coming from the city's share of the county's money going to GoEDC. So that, in effect, I would have to come up with the other $33,000 for the pass-through that would go through to GoEDC out of that line item. And that's what I did tell her a few weeks ago.
So the expectation is that GoEDC would be utilizing your services.
Correct. She wouldn't be on the city's payroll at this point. After December 31st, it would be something between her and GoEDC. For that
so that would activity. Not be. Would that be a line item that would be on the levy then, or are we increasing a particular line item relative to our contribution to the city's contribution to GoEDC? Or are we reducing?
We probably need to come up with a line that says the county's share that will be passed through the city going to Go EDC.
And I thought the county share was part of that 166,000. I thought
It
$1
is.
of that.
It is.
So
That's
it's that
part of it.
and?
But we'll be passing that all through to Go EDC, and then Go EDC is going to be hiring Brenda now at this point.
Yes.
Okay. And ultimately, and the reasons I'm asking these questions, because ultimately I'm trying to determine what our entire contribution is to Go EDC. And I mean, some of the cost-cutting measures that I may suggest will have to do with how those numbers are laid out. I've got 30,000 for Brenda's position, which it sounds like we're transferring that. And
Yes.
then the 133,000, which is a $2 per capita, $1 of that comes from the county and is passed through to us. Is that correct? And then we're contributing.
I don't want to double count that because they do give us 66,000. So I want them to get credit for the whole 66,000. But the total, if you add what Go EDC is asking for, they're asking for $2 per capita from us, which would be the
133, yeah.
133, and then the 33 from the county for the 50 cents per capita is what Go EDC is asking for. If you add it all up, it still comes up to the 166,000. So that does, I think it does need to show up in our budget as a contribution because the county would only give it to the municipality, and if we're going to pass it through, it needs to show up as a revenue and an expense.
If you take a
So-
look at page 197, that might simplify it. There's two line items that, since the budget, we've had more discussions. There's two line items, 6446 contractual employment and 6466 miscellaneous contractual services. It totals 163,000. It's our intent that that's the money that's going to go to Go EDC. Originally, we were going to have Brenda on, but it looks like it's just going to make it easier for Go EDC to contract directly with Brenda, and she's going to assist us in the transition to an eventual executive director or CEO.
And that makes sense. So what I'm curious now out of that portion, though, and ultimately what I'm trying to understand here, a portion of this is county money that's passed through. What number of this is going on the levy?
Okay.
But
If you want to go back to page 195, I think I can help you with that. You'll see that 66,300 is grants and aids. That's really the county's money. So that's the part of that 163 that will come from the county. So the balance will be roughly $100,000.
Okay.
Plus or minus.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Yes.
Anyway, I wanted to finish walking you through the sheet, just so you, it was really more to get you set up for these discussions. Each of the different options that we have, and then also Roman numeral page 11 were the items that staff had cut from the budget. These cuts are already reflected in the budget, but we just wanted to remind you, those are the things we already did. There was some discussion about could we restore some of those things, and I want to. I'll have a little bit more on that in a moment, but these are the ones that we specifically had cut prior to submitting it to council. Then there were some items that were requested by council through our discussions at the budget workshop. One had to do with changing the assumptions for health insurance for non-represented employees. And Ms. Brinkman has provided you an updated one because we wanted to show the general fund impact. And this one just shows for non-represented the savings if we took our insurance premium share and took it to 13, 14, or 15%. I'll just cut to the chase in terms of a dollar amount. The savings to the general fund, if we went to 15%, would be approximately $116,000. And I do have a comment on that later. I'm just pointing that out. That was the question that was asked. We wanted to provide that analysis so the council had it.
Yes, I brought that up based on the fact that, private insurance, private companies, that employee share is 25, 30% 30% and sometimes north of 30% as well. Now, I don't know, I have not totally made a decision of where I'm going with this, but I do want it understood that we need to address this particular figure moving forward, and to understand that the people that, you know, are and granted, we have employees who live in the city of Oshkosh who are taxpayers, but the vast majority of the people that are making levy payments are paying significantly more, and as we can see, upwards of, at a minimum, twice this for their health insurance, and still getting similar, you know, similar percentage raises as we go forward. I mean, this is something that we need to address and begin moving this to a more equitable share.
And I have a few observations and suggestions when I'm before I finish. The last page is the hospital insurance fund. Just wanted to refresh everybody's memory about that in terms of where our costs are for the last 5 years. We provided this at the last workshop. I just wanted to make sure you had it just in case. So these are all just to have at your disposal to refer to these items. And I do point out this sort of transitioning to some observations and suggestions. My main concern, and I asked the council last time to wear their hat of being the board of directors for our health insurance fund, and the board of directors is point out to the board that we've lost 10% of our employee or our customer base since 2010. A lot of it has to do with just the dynamics of what happened with Act 10, also what's happening out in the field as other employers are making changes to health insurance. As I call it, employees and their spouses are having what I call the kitchen table conversation. We can only afford one of these now. We used to be able to afford both of them because they were relatively inexpensive. Now that it's starting to have an impact, which one are we going to choose? And we want to make sure that we don't necessarily lose people who are generally healthy employees. And I'm saying this from a health insurance standpoint. If you were running an insurance business and health insurance business, you'd want the healthiest customers possible because that will keep your costs down and your revenue will still go in there. And I talked about that last time. I appreciate the council's vote of confidence in what we're doing with health insurance with your approval this evening of the employee health clinic. That was done with a little bit of trepidation on some employees' parts. It's new. I believe it's going to be a very good thing. I appreciate all the reinforcing comments that council gave. But it is a bit of a change for the staff, and we've undergone many changes over the last few years. My concern is that, I don't know if you remember the old AT&T study that was done in the 1920s where they changed the lighting, and every time they changed the lighting it impacted employee behavior. I suspect that we're getting employee behavior changes with every little move we make. I think the employee clinic move will be a positive move, but it'll take some time. When Councilor Peck asked for this analysis, and when I saw the final number of 116,000, I couldn't help but notice that on the cut list that we had presented the council, which is a couple pages earlier, was that we talked about changing the assumptions for the surcharge to rebuild the fund balance in the health insurance fund. If council were to take that one, that's not going to be one of those moments that changes behavior with employees because that's something more internal. But oddly enough, it has virtually the same impact. It will save us about $120,000. Now, any of these you're taking a risk. When you take risks on assumptions, you just assume natural risks. But what we're talking about here is rebuilding the fund balance over a period of time. If we were to bail on the health insurance fund next year, this would not be a good move. If we are looking at, we just want to rebuild it so that down the road we have the choice of doing away with it, we can take our time rebuilding that fund without impacting behaviors. We have a surcharge on there that employees are paying for and we're paying for as the employer because that's part of rebuilding the fund. If we reduce that surcharge, we're going to save some money. So if if given the choice, my recommendation to council would be, don't change the behavior, which we don't necessarily know what the employees will do. Let's achieve the same savings with changing our assumption in the fund. We'll have the same net impact on the general fund, and I think it will do less damage or potential damage to the health insurance fund, yet give us the bang for our buck that we're looking for on the health insurance side. That's a suggestion and an observation on my part, given what I know now versus what, the wisdom I had 6 weeks ago versus the wisdom I have now. I think there's some value to that. And then there's one other item, and this isn't necessarily just...
Before you get off that item,
please,
I just
yeah,
wanted to respond
please.
to that. And Mr. Peck was talking about over time, that almost has to change, and that's something that other people are looking at too. One thing I've done over the past week is gone to about 8 other city budgets, and other city budgets are doing exactly what Mr. Peck suggests, are looking at it. It may not happen this year, but I would agree that it has to happen over time. Your suggestion may be better for the short run, but the long run, I agree with Mr. Peck. Structurally, we get that, and we're not alone at looking at that now. Eau Claire's looking at it big time.
No, we're not alone.
So
And I agree
competitively.
Right.
So there's a short run and a long run kind of
Right.
thing here.
I think I stated a year or two ago on council, I wanted to get closer to an 80-20. My only concern is the collective bargaining side of this. The police department, fire department, transit are over here, and they're at these numbers where we're at now. How can we shift the burden? The non-reps would have to take the bigger of the hit, because if we would say, let's just say all of a sudden we go from 12% increase health insurance to 20% in collective bargaining, we're going to get laughed out the door.
I understand that. So you
And
develop a
that's
strategy.
three-quarters of our
You got to develop a
employees.
strategy, but you got to start
Right.
somewhere. And
Right.
others are looking at the same thing, and
Yeah,
and
I don't know
if
what
you
the
take
strategy
Eau
would be,
Claire,
but,
they got
no.
the same issue. So
To answer that question, though, and I appreciated Councilman Peck bringing this forward, and something that popped into my mind just a couple of days ago that I should have said at the time as well is if you increase deductibles, you can achieve somewhat the same result without changing the premium. And that question of the unfair nature of a premium increase to one class of employees that wouldn't be there to another class of employees exists. The school district, I know Oshkosh Public School District had a analysis of what the difference between a $500 deductible, what the difference between a $750 deductible, and that you're assuming based on use for the previous year, but you can put some financial dollars to that. And I'm sorry I didn't ask that in advance. I don't know if that's something the rest of the council is interested in looking at and considering, and if that would be an issue to crunch those numbers as well. But
One of the things that,
I just don't want to get a big separation of one set of employees to the other, where we can control one in a sense, but we can't maybe control the other. But a strategy is totally, I totally get it, and I think that makes sense, and I think we have to get there, but it's going to take a lot of time.
with the clinic, I'm just concerned about radically changing our behavior from a health insurance fund standpoint. Normally, we let our employees know what our rates are going to be for the following year. Because of the recent discussions at the workshops, Ms. Brinkman has not gotten that information out. But as I refer to the kitchen table discussion, other employers have already given out their numbers for the following year, and employees want to know, do I stay with this plan? Do I go to my spouse's plan? And they're having those discussions. The quicker we can get some resolution to that, the better off we are for our employees and our health insurance fund.
And I did want to ask that question about when the enrollment period is, because even though I mentioned that about deductibles, you're right, it really could be unfair to at least bring that up for next year.
This surcharge issue, though, is because we're self-insured, right?
Correct.
If we were not self-insured and we went with Wisconsin City counties, whatever, that's not an issue. It's because we're self-insured that we have to make sure we have a lot of money in the kitty, because if somebody needs open heart surgery or whatever, they can deplete the fund. But we do have that stopgap thing.
Right.
But a lot of this issue is because we're self-insured, not openly competitively getting bids from other insurance companies.
Well, being self-insured, it also says that we're not going to be paying the profit on those insurance companies that we'd be paying for, and that's a legitimate discussion to have about analyzing that. I think a lot of things are going to change with ACA, and we got to take a look at, I don't think anything is off the table. In a short term, I need to clear the table to have a little more clarity, but long term, I don't disagree that we shouldn't be looking at those things. But if we close down shop, we want to make sure that our health fund is there so that we aren't holding the bag on a significant amount of money that we have no recourse except to ourselves. So, but when things are good, when things were very good, we were giving breaks to employees. We could have increased it. Our consultant was saying, well, you should probably increase your rates by 7 or 8%. We only did 5% for a couple of years because we had such a good surplus in the fund, we could afford to take that down, and we wanted to show good faith to employees that we were not, as some people thought, we were skimming money out of the fund and buying garbage trucks, which wasn't the case, but we wanted to prove that. Oh gosh, the other thought I had with health insurance, well, it was, part of it was the issue about letting the employees know, and that's probably the biggest thing right now with that. We can take that surcharge down, and that'll help us in the long run.
My question about the enrollment period, though, when does that end?
Well, most employers have their enrollment period ending this week, so while I don't want a final decision on budget stuff, we need to give our employees some certainty about where we're going on, and if anything is probably disruptive to the employees, it's probably uncertainty more than anything. We don't need to make a final decision on wage increases, for example, because we've got until January 1 to do that. But the window for health insurance is rapidly closing, and that's why I was looking for something to suggest to council as an alternative to some of these other things, and it's to reduce the uncertainty, but also to give you the savings that perhaps you were looking for in the first place. There's one more thing that I wanted to throw out there for council. Mr. Fitzpatrick and I had an opportunity to meet with Charlie Carlson, explaining some of the situation that was going on here, and talked about the fact that we were recommending suspending the pay performance program. And he had a couple observations. Number one, I think he wanted to slap me upside the head because he was in agreement with council that you didn't want to renege on something that you'd only committed yourselves to a while back. But he shared with me a story about a class he's currently teaching, and just asking employees, asking the students as an employee, what's important to you and in your job. And a lot of things were listed. And of all the things that were listed, pay was only the third most important. There were other items there, and it wasn't that pay was the third most important. The point was that it's more than just the pay that matters. Now, pay is very important, but the point was that there are other important factors. And we discussed what we had talked to council about over a year and a half ago regarding the pay per performance plan. And you recall the employees came and talked a lot about it. And one of the other items that was discussed was time off as an alternative to pay. And if dollars are an issue, and I know the council, I've talked to a majority of you, and there's a lot of support for the pay per performance program, which I think is very much appreciated. One of the alternatives we could look at is not having any budgetary impact by just saying we'll do paid time off. Now, and Ms. Brinkman has done some research and found that we could replace, for example, our $500 bonus with a 2-day bonus, 2-day paid time off. The $1,000 would be 4 days off. And just if that would be the bonus, there would be no direct budgetary impact. Now, depending on the employee, that could change. If you've got something where, for example, refuse isn't picked up, we aren't going to put a note on your garbage can that says, oh, sorry, we gave the guy off. The reality is that we're going to collect that garbage regardless of what person has off. So we'll have to make accommodations for that. And staff debated that, the pros and the cons of it. And there are some cons with it, but I think we can manage it from a budget standpoint with no budgetary impact if we just say we're not going to budget anything, but within the rules, I have the discretion to use paid time off as one of the other alternatives. And knowing the support the council has, I could do that, and I just throw that out to you as a suggestion, not to say absolutely final decision, but if you don't fund the program or can't find the cash to fund the program, I think I have an alternative available for you.
What about for those employees that, don't feel like they can take vacation and they're not even using the days that they already have? How is that an incentive for them when they're not even using what they have or don't feel that they can?
You talk about Trina and me is what you're saying. There are a lot of situations like that.
So is there a plan B for those folks?
It's really a manner of managing paid time off. Part of it is those are the types of days they're first in, first out. I do have the authority to allow people to carry over vacation. And if they can't use it in a full year, I have the authority to carry that over. With these would be use it or lose it. The idea would be those are the first days you use before you start using your vacation. Then at the end of the year, if you have your residual vacation, in my discretion, I can allow those to get carried over. And I've done that in the past.
You're also giving up services of that employee for those days, and in essence, you're reducing their number of hours, so increasing their wage rate.
Admittedly, yes. It's just
So it's sort of it's not a free thing to do.
It's not a free thing. No, nothing's ever free, but does it have a budgetary impact? We can dodge the budgetary impact by doing it this way. So those are things, that's really, that concludes my sort of opening salvo for you to get the fireworks going. But I thought I wanted to share those observations with you as you discuss this a little more.
I have another question for you, something that's not on the sheets here and we really haven't discussed before. We have about $1 million in capital expenditures in which we're going to pay cash for, with the idea that it's going to save us money over time, which it will. We also have a number of items in the capital budget which are basically placeholder. I think there were about 4 or 5 of them which are placeholder items, so they really don't identify to a specific thing.
Are you talking about parking and roof HVAC?
Well, I mean, even neighborhoods and a number of things are kind of placeholder dollars. They really don't have, we don't know what we're going to spend them on. We've come up with a figure and said we'd like to have a figure to use for some things, and we've set an arbitrary figure at it. It could be another figure. Here's my question for you in terms of savings. What if we were to take $1 million off of the cash payments and say to you, not $1 million, $100,000 or $120,000 off, so take 10% off that, and say put that back in the capital budget, but allocate it in the way you think that makes some sense. Reduce some of the placeholder, 10,000 here, 10,000 here, 20,000 there, at your discretion and based on as the year progresses. I'd like your kind of reaction to that, because that would save $100,000 next year. Or it wouldn't save quite that much because it would have to go in interest, but the interest payment would be considerably less. I know that goes against the other part, but we're still putting $900,000 or whatever into cash payments, and it's a way to do it. It's a way to do it without specifically identifying, because the big issue is getting the macro numbers down, but it's making the micro decisions. But that would allow those micro decisions to go on during the year. I mean, even the sidewalk program, what if we got it, took 20,000 off there, 20,000 off another thing in terms of some of those placeholder numbers at your discretion, because you would have a better feel for, you and staff would have a better feel for which would be the least harm in terms of, that's just a thought that we hadn't talked about, so I just want to know what your reaction is to that.
My first reaction is that, if you recall from our last meeting, we talked about our 11.4 borrowing cap. Right. As proposed in the CIP, we're actually under that a little bit.
Right, so that's a little bit.
Straight away,
but it's a little savings. It's not the 100.
But it's probably. Trina's going to do the quick. No, I think it was on the. If you go to the large sheet,
it was 11.3 something, I think, wasn't it, or something?
11,358.
So there's 42,000 right out of the gate.
Right.
So that's something that you could do just like that and still be within your threshold of borrowing. The your comfort zone about going above 11.4, I'd leave that up to your
So
discretion.
I don't want to go above 11.4. We'd leave it, we'd keep it at 11.4, but you would take some of those placeholder amounts and reduce them.
Can you identify those placeholders?
Well,
I think he's asking me what I would do
could, but I was trying to
placeholder-wise.
give it to staff to give them some ability to do it.
I could give you,
but
I could give you a few of those.
I mean, I could come up with them if you want them, but I don't know that you want us giving direction, because you have a better sense of which ones of those are kind of comfortable placeholders and which one of those are really very uncomfortable placeholders.
Well, the easy one, you can take the first 42 and get credit for that, because the first 42, you take it up to 11.4, and you've got that. I would probably take it out of parking lot improvement primarily because it's the biggest one we have.
That's one of them that I had.
So we could probably take that down to 300,000. We are still borrowing for the parking lot program. The whole parking lot program is funded at 500, so we would be knocking it down to, say, 450. That would probably be my gut reaction. And then if we had some savings on borrowing in other things, we could replenish the parking program, because $500,000 is still a good number to have, but that would be the one I would play around with. We wouldn't exceed 11.4, and any savings we'd find anywhere, we would put into parking right away. And I've talked to you about I sent you a memo just the other day about a downtown parking issue. We don't want to ignore downtown parking for a variety of reasons, but that'd be my easiest one to go at. And then the second one would probably be would be sidewalk rehabilitation, but you would be cutting back a service until such time as you knew perhaps you could borrow for that, or we could find savings elsewhere. That would be my initial reaction.
I was just trying to throw that out as a way to save some money and not take something out directly and give you the flexibility to make a move there, and we still have $900,000 in there. After all, $100,000 in terms of the capital budget is a fraction of a percent in terms of that total capital budget. I think that's what we have to keep in mind. Is that a $70 million budget, even if 320,000 is, well, let's see, if we were to take it to if we were to go to 3%, that would only be a reduction of 0.07 of 1%. So we're only talking about the last percent of your budget and a fraction of the last percentage of your budget.
Because we're not making any decisions here tonight,
No,
what I would suggest is we take, those are the types of questions and comments that staff's looking for. I throw that on the list and let council think about it a little more. I gave you a 2-minute reaction to it. I'll have another week or so to reflect on that as well, and offer that up with perhaps some other suggestions as we get to the 25th.
I would appreciate that.
At the same time, when we do that, though, we need to take a look at, so we don't get to where we were in the past, where previous councils were cheap and not frugal. Granted, nobody likes to spend money, but if it's a matter of putting monies into something now, the time value of money is, we have to take that into account. And while it may be seen as spending $50,000 this year, if it can save us $60,000 in a future year, or save us the need to borrow money, which previous councils did for non-capital items, so to speak, which we're now paying for, I think that needs to be a part of the decision as well, in that, we need to be frugal, not just cheap, and make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for a larger expense in the future.
I would concur with that. I think you and I were on the same wavelength there. I would agree. My question for you, Mark and Trina, would be, these scenarios, when would we have them in our hands? Because what I don't want to have happen is surprises coming on the same night as we're passing the budget. So I want some time to look at all the scenarios, no surprises, and opportunity to communicate with staff and with you, with Trina, just to make sure we're all on the same page before we approve any budget.
We just chatted briefly as you were making that statement. Roman numeral page X, what we will do following this meeting is we will take everything that we've heard and we will incorporate it in here. And again, every $35,000 plus, or, a little over 35, is 1 cent. To get, and the other worksheet, the cheat sheet we have on the front, 1% increase equals 320,000. So we can give you a whole list of those. What we'll do is, for this Friday, in my packet, the packet I sent out to council, we'll have the most up-to-date version based on everything that happened tonight. If you have some thoughts over the weekend, over the course of next week, we'll give you another one the following Friday, so you have another up-to-date version. And then if you have another epiphany the following weekend, we'll be ready for you on the 25th with the most up-to-date changes, because I think the whole idea is that we don't want to restrict any council member from throwing out an idea, so that when you get to the 25th, you got a little more clarity. Now, I can't account for anything that happens between Friday and Tuesday, but I'll get you, up to Friday, I'll get you everything up to date. And I say that, and I really mean Trina will get it for you. but we can do that.
Yes.
So along the lines of those additions, just a couple quick ones that I had here. And I noted you had this is similar to what I had suggested during the 2014 budget discussions. I noticed you already had the cut the non-represented market adjustment to 1% and had a value for that. Along those lines, and this is in addition to the levy, but the cash value for the pay performance program, I think I recall that was $150,000. Can we have that listed on the? And again, I know it's in.
That's on the other sheet, but it's here.
I'm sorry.
It's on Roman numeral page 11. It's actually the last one on Roman numeral page 11. That was $150,000. That was already taken out of the budget, but that gives you you've got those numbers there as well.
And then, my one other item is just in relate. I mean, the city certainly has made a commitment to economic development and funded economic development considerably. This increase in its funding is also considerable for the following year. Just wondering if we can break out what the difference between a $1 per capita contribution is versus the $2 that's currently in the budget.
You can do that.
My only question for you was in regards to the pay for performance incentive, where we, if we cut it, it's a savings of $150,000. If we incorporate it back in and use, as you had suggested, time off, would you need that same $150,000, or is it $120,000, $75,000, $100,000?
The idea, if we were to do it entirely based on paid time off, that we would not put any assumptions in on any additional costs. Now, that may vary by department. Let department use their judgment. Without any extra money, they give
within their department. So you're you're saying we would still cut that out.
Well, this was already cut out.
But with your idea, though, we're not taking any of this and adding it back into the budget.
Correct.
You're saying using existing departmental
resources.
Okay. Thanks for the clarification. And you probably already said that, so.
No, that's
apologies.
the other thing that is a little footnote on the very front page, the little cheat sheet, and we weren't sure how to best point that out. We are currently $6,968 below expenditure restraint. Given our discussion, and I see where council's been going, which is what I expected, that the number that I had set with 4.55 was going to be. It was way past the ceiling that I knew council wanted. We're under expenditure restraint. To go higher would be dangerous from expenditure restraint. We're moving in the direction where that will not be a problem, and we will, as I mentioned last time, and I think Councilor Fitzgerald had asked the question, we will then, to get ourselves right up to the edge on expenditure restraint, will increase the uncollectible accounts, which is really somewhat of an arbitrary number anyway, but because it's really, a lot of it's accounting when we write off uncollectible accounts. We'll do an offsetting revenue and expenditure to get ourselves up under expenditure restraint. So let's say, for example, we're $50,000 under expenditure restraint. We'll come in with $48,000 increased uncollectibles, increase in revenue, so it'll have no levy impact whatsoever, but it'll maximize our expenditure restraint. We cut that to get under expenditure restraint, so if you reduce it any more, we'll restore that a little bit just to get ourselves, because that helps us up for future years to manage expenditure restraint. And I think council understood that at the last time. That's sort of our variable to get ourselves there. But we're at 6,968, just plus or minus.
Other questions or comments at this point? In terms of preparation or where we're going to go? Are we somewhat clear on where we're going to go? Okay, and if people have ideas, points in time?
What about the CIP? Are there any thoughts or questions about the CIP? We've kind of, it's kind of 11.4, the story of 11.4 million, but I didn't want to.
But we have discussed a couple of things on that. There's still 42,000 or whatever there.
We're still under.
The 11.4 that's there, and there still are some ways to deal with that. That's what I was suggesting.
Okay.
I still want that on there as an idea.
Department heads are here. I don't think they're jumping up and down to talk, but they will be happy to answer any questions you have.
Anybody have any questions at this point? I don't see it.
Well,
Go
let
ahead.
me just follow up on that. Maybe, I don't know, Chief Franz, why don't you come up a minute? Just, it's scenario-based strictly. I'm not
Hypothetical.
yeah, whatever you want to put it in. I'm not interested in cutting any positions in the police department or the fire department. But if we did put say a hiring freeze of 6 months, how would that affect operations in your department? If you had mentioned that you're kind of getting to the point where you're going to be losing some of your top administrators due to retirement. Obviously, those people you're going to have to replace. It would be probably the entry level. How would that affect, say, some of your operations?
Well, if we would, for example, your suggestion that you had made delay hiring for 6 months, looking at July, our training period is about 2.5 months before we put people online. So it really would be mid-September by the time we were able to utilize those personnel. A couple of things with that. That puts us into peak vacation time. So some of that, the savings then when we hit peak vacation time, if we want to keep everything operational and would put us into overtime probably through most of that time period and negate majority of the savings that you'd experience during that piece of it, especially during peak vacation times, because we run pretty marginally anyway with an assumption of overtime to a certain extent during that time period, because we have to allow a certain number of people off by contract. So, Jeff and I were just talking about this, where it would also have an impact on us is right now we have some assumptions built in regarding the promotions that we're going to have with this too, and we've got that sort of already, that savings we're looking at having that built into the budget, that we're probably going to make our promotions in March. And it's going to take us some time to get through our hiring process and get those folks on. So, but as we said, that's how close we have things figured really here already. The greatest delay we could probably have and maybe not have that much of an impact would be about somewhere in that time, that March, April time frame. So we'd be looking at somewhere in the range of maybe $30,000 or $40,000. But that's the actual dollar savings, but then again, that causes a delay in us moving forward with getting our staffing plans back up and kind of getting back to normal probably by July with promotions and everybody in the proper positions.
Yeah. Good.
In the long run, that kind of it's a short period of time, but nothing occurs in a vacuum, that it doesn't have some impact on all those things we're talking about with our succession planning when we can make those promotions, etc. So, but
it's more of a philosophical question than anything. So, thank you.
Yep.
Okay. Any other questions?
Just more of a comment, Mark. I really like the idea of the paid time off. When I was with Winnebago County, we had that. Where they gave us extra personal time, but we could only take it as long as it didn't count to put someone in overtime. That was the only way we could use the time off. If it was going to cost overtime to the county, then they wouldn't allow you to have that day off. You'd have to take a different day off. So again, there was no economic impact. Yes, there is an economic impact because you're increasing the amount of days of an employee can take off. but they put a restriction on it and left it up to the supervisor that you could grant that day off or whatever, as long as it didn't impact overtime. No, you can't control somebody calls in sick, obviously. You know, you work a minimum schedule, let's just say, for example, Sheriff's Office, you needed 5 officers. They gave it to you off. Now they're down to 4, somebody calls in sick, you're going to be in overtime. You can't control that. But what they're looking at, who had already put in for time off, that extra day could be denied because it would cost overtime then to fill it. So, but I think it's a great incentive. I had always said that even as a young officer growing up, I wanted more time off than I wanted time on sometimes. So it's a good incentive. And not everybody's going to get it either. Don't forget, it would still follow the criteria of what you have for pay for performance to get that. And so if someone isn't eligible for pay for performance, they don't get the extra time off.
3.5 average rating, excuse me, for the $500, which in this case would be 2 days, and a 4 to the 4 days.
4 days off.
And it would only apply to non-reps.
And would only apply to non-reps. Correct.
Okay, if there aren't any more questions, I'm going to ask the deputy mayor to read our motion to go into closed session.
Okay, ask for a motion to go into closed session. City Manager's Office in room 402. The Common Council may convene into closed session pursuant to Section 19.851C of the Wisconsin State Statutes to discuss the performance evaluation and compensation regarding the city manager, an employee over which the Common Council has jurisdiction and exercises responsibility.
Is there a second?
Second.
Is clerk still here back here? Ab, I need you.
Oh, no, I'm here. I'm actually.
He's the clerk.
I'm clerking.
You're clerking.
I'm
Okay.
clerking.
Take the roll call. We need a roll call vote.
Okay.
Starts with me.
Peck,
Aye.
Herman,
Aye.
Allison Osby,
Aye.
Hansky,
Aye.
Fitzgerald,
Aye.
Cummings,
Aye.
Tower.
Aye.
Ayes have it. That's the closed session, and
A motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? We're adjourned. We're adjourned to the other room.